There's not a lot different in the syllabus than what I already showed you on the temporary website that we've been working from, but I do officially need to go over the syllabus, so I will do that. Also, we'll be talking about the background material and the beginning of the general prologue for the Canterbury Tales, which was not a lot of reading, but it was, a lot of info and also that medieval stuff. So I want to go through all that today. Also, if we have time at the end, I want to take any questions that you might have on discussion number 1, which the post is due tomorrow. I'll talk about that near the end of the period. I have been getting a couple questions, and so maybe there are a couple things I can clarify for that and some reminders so that you can start off strong with that. Progress reports go in tomorrow, but just a reminder that there will not be a grade for this class because we don't have any assignments until Monday. So if you have somebody who needs to know how you're doing or whatever, or I mean, if you have a dual class, it's probably hit or miss whether you get progress reports anyway. So. All right, I'm gonna leave that calendar open because I'll come back to it at the end, but for right now, let me open our course. Just a reminder that you can get the class calendar here on the main page, the Start Here page. I'm going to go into course content, and we're in the Middle Ages at the moment. For today, you were supposed to have read this background information and the general prologue. For Tuesday, you need to read The Wife of Bath's prologue and The Wife of Bath's tale. They are very entertaining. I'll just preview that. The Wife of Bath is one of the most colorful characters in the entire Canterbury Tales. She's well developed and well described by Chaucer. In her prologue, she talks about her life and her 6 husbands that she's had and how a woman can gain power over her husband and how a man can make a woman fall in love with him. And so just she's pretty entertaining. And then she tells a story that is kind of questioning nobility. What is nobility, and can you be noble if you don't have money? Like, in other words, does nobility spring from being born into the noble class, or is nobility about your actions and behaviors? And so her tale kind of brings that question up. Chaucer's asking us that through The Wife of Bath. So that's a little preview for the readings. I guess I would do the syllabus first because that's, let me just get that out of the way. You can see a copy of the syllabus at any time from the Start Here page where it says syllabus. Go figure. So I know I talked about a lot of these things the first week that we had class back from Christmas break, but I need to officially go through it with the class. So I'm not going to read it to you, but I will point a few things out. It's not really that much different. The coursework is different, obviously, from first semester, but I'm still the same instructor, so it's not like my policies have changed a whole lot. Here is my contact information. You can email me in either place, but I do check my STC email, but I check my WISD stuff way more frequently. The fastest way to get a message to me is probably using my, this is not my cell phone number, this is my Google Voice number. You can text me there. You can also set up an appointment if you want to have a Zoom call. I talked about that the other day. Here are the learning outcomes for the course or for the program, so just English in general. You should be able to articulate main ideas in a given text, explain devices, use standard English grammar, integrate source material into academic arguments, attribute source material using, documentation strategies, and also you should be able to identify indicators of cultural or historic movements of a literary period. These are the learning outcomes for this course. In this course, you should be able to identify key ideas, representative authors, and works from particular historical time periods, cultural events. So you should know, roughly how does English literature line up with history. You should be able to analyze literary works as expressions of individual or communal values. How does this work demonstrate what was important to the Anglo-Saxons or to people in the Renaissance or people in the Victorian era? You should also be able to identify characteristic forms of expression during different periods. You should be able to look at a piece and determine that it's a romantic poem or that it is a Renaissance drama. You should be able to articulate aesthetic principles that guide the work in literature, which is basically literary devices, the things that we use to evaluate and look at literature. And you should be able to write research-based critical papers. The book is here. I'm not going to link the PDF to anything in STC. I'm not 100% sure that using the PDF is, ultra legit. I'm going to say that it's COVID. I'm blaming everything on COVID nowadays. It's working out very well for me. I recommend trying it. I'm going to say it's just easier than going to get a textbook. You can, of course, go and get a textbook. They're available in the front office. I've already been in contact with the textbook master or whatever he's called. And so they have the books available if you would like to have one, but I think most people will make do with the PDF, but I'm just not going to link it here. Hopefully you downloaded it, or it's still available there on that website that we started off the course with. After that, there's an outline of the course and the things that we will be reading and studying and some due dates. This lines up with the calendar. For me, I find a calendar more helpful because I can literally look at the days and count, and just telling me this is on 2/8 doesn't help me in my mind figure out that's 3 weeks from now. So I like a calendar, but I did put it out here in list form in case that is more helpful to you. Here are some policies that they put in every syllabus, which is that you have the right to get your education free of any kind of discrimination. And if you have issues or any questions about that, here is where you can go for some more information. Same thing here about the Title IX statement. You can't be excluded from something based on any of your attributes. If you are pregnant or parenting, there are special resources for you. If you have a disability, then there are services available to you through the college, and there's a number. If you're a veteran, this is not a developmental course, but if it was, there's the policy statement about that. Developmental is the course that you take before you take the course for credit because you can't pass the TSI. Here is the student handbook. This is the statement on COVID-19. So if you want to know the status of how the college is handling COVID-19, you can click there and they do update that. I did at the faculty meeting, I'll just say this, it's not off topic, it's on COVID-19. They did mention, the department chair mentioned that STC right now is looking at continuing online through the summer and being partially in person in the fall. So if you're a junior and you're going to be continuing to take STC courses, they're going to open up some courses for the fall, but they're looking at like a balance between online courses and back to in-person courses in the fall, assuming everything improves. I think they're assuming things will improve by then because of the vaccine. Okay, additional items. This is the stuff I get to put in. Well, I did the chart and stuff like that, but this is the stuff about policies for the course. You're really only going to be turning in 2 documents. The discussion posts and all of that happen within the platform of Blackboard, so you're not going to be putting a heading or anything like that. But here it is for when you do your papers. Communication, I do have some notes here about communication. It's important that you're checking your email. It's important that you're checking in with me if there are issues. And, you know, I'm pretty good with communication. So if I email you a question or something like that, you should, you know, within a period of time, make sure that you get back to me. Electronic devices, that's more crucial for in-person classes, but it's the same thing with virtual classes. You should be concentrating on what's in front of you live instead of something else. I don't have a way to police that. Attendance. The attendance, as you know, is necessary to keep up with the material. You can watch the videos of class that I post every day. So every day after class, I will post them. Also at the bottom of the unit, I post the videos that I made for that unit. I'll show you that when we go into unit 1 in a second. So it's expected that if you miss class that you'll do the formative so that I can touch base with you about what you might not be understanding in the material, and also that you'll watch the video from the class period that you missed. I do sometimes get questions from people. They'll email me and say, I don't understand what to do for the whatever assignment. And I'll be like, well, I spent 25 minutes going over that in yesterday's class period. Watch the video. You know, I mean, it's not like I don't want to help people, but it's obvious to me that you didn't do what you're supposed to do when you were absent. So do try to keep up with Blackboard and the calendar and any classes that you might miss. Grading policies, same as first semester. Late assignments get a reduction of 10 points per calendar day. So the discussion number 1 is due tomorrow, the post part of it. If that comes in on Saturday, then I'll automatically take 10 points off the top. If it comes in on Sunday, I'll take 20 points off the top. Especially with discussions, it's important to be on time because your classmates need to have your initial post so that they can do their responses. And so they have to finish those by Monday, and maybe some people want to finish theirs on Saturday. That's their call. So there should be all of the class posts up by Friday, you know, midnight, so that anybody who wants to start working on the second portion of the assignment, the responses, has the availability to do so. Do check your grade books. I've noticed this especially this year, and I think it's because of online. I'll get a lot of people who it's coming up to when grades are due, like it's the end of the term or it's the end of the 6 weeks in the East grade book, and people will be like, why am I failing? You know, the grades, I post them pretty regularly. I'm not like one of those people that puts in all the grades at the end. So, you know, do keep up with your grade book. Sometimes I make mistakes. You know, I could put in a 10 instead of 100. Make sure you bring that to my attention. But if you're looking in the last week of a class or the last week of a 6 weeks to try to figure out what happened, you know, it's too late by that point in time. So especially the 6 weeks, I think there are only 3 grades because we start the assignments 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks after the East course started. So I think there are only 3 grades. I put in all the grades into the grade book already, like the columns. So I think there are only 3 for the 4th 6 weeks. So do keep up with that. If there's an issue, let me know. There may be a difference between your, even though I'm inputting the same grades into both grade books, there could be a difference in the percentages because the way that East works is on a 60-40 scale, and the way STC, this course, works is on a different percentage scale. So all the discussions together are 20% of your grade. The midterm is 20%, the finals 20%, the first paper is 15% because it's shorter, and the research paper is the one with the heaviest load in terms of points and percentage ratio, and that is 25%. So even though all the same grades will be there, the breakdowns are different in the grade book. So I don't think it's wildly different, but you know, it could be different, the percentages. Revision policy, you can revise any of your essays anytime you like if you get a failing grade. This is true also first semester. There were some people who made 60s on their first paper, and I was kind of anticipating that they would contact me for revision, but some people didn't. They just stuck with that grade. But you can revise an essay, just touch base with me. We'll make a little appointment for a 15-minute, talk about what you can do. And then you usually get a week after that to do a revision, and I will regrade it. Plagiarism is an important topic and something that you want to avoid, whether it is on purpose or by accident. We had an assignment first semester about plagiarism, going through the rules of the handbook. Just keep that in mind. I know that sometimes well, for some people, they're always on the up and up. There's other people who will, if they get pressed for time, they'll make a decision to borrow some information, or they might ask somebody for what they're turning in for their assignment. And you want to avoid all of that as much as possible. I think during COVID, it's important for me as an instructor to be lenient and helpful. So if it comes to a point where you're running out of time to do something and you have a temptation to look online and just get something and copy paste it, I think it would be better if you just contacted me and asked for an extension so that you could do your work legitimately. If you get an extension, then the 10-point deduction doesn't happen. So it's better to just email me and say, I got slammed with this project, or this thing came up in my family, or like whatever it might be. And I'm pretty lenient with that stuff. So I will usually give you a new time frame and say, I need it by this date. Is that okay? And that's way better than trying to turn in some illegitimate work or something like that. I'm not saying that you would. I'm just saying if you get that thought in your head, it's better not to do that. Just email me and let me know what's going on. So yeah, this is the plagiarism statement. This is the statement if there's an issue with the course, if you have a question, if you think that you weren't treated fairly, you have to come to me first, and we'll try to resolve whatever issue. If I'm pretty easygoing, so this doesn't really happen to me, but if you don't get satisfaction, then you can go and talk to the English department chair. And this is his contact information. So that's pretty much the syllabus. You can access it anytime you like, right from this main page, the Start Here page. Any questions? Oh, I need to bring my chat up in case somebody types something in it. Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of boring, but it's necessary for us to go through that stuff. Let's head over to course content and into our unit. This unit goes until the end of next week. You'll remember that I was telling you about the video lectures. If you click on this table of contents, if you click here, you can see that toward the bottom of the unit table of contents there, I'm posting direct links to the different videos that I've made for the different class periods where I've gone over this stuff. So not only do you have access to the playlist where I've uploaded them, but I made this little link spot for, if you just need to figure out which, there's one that you missed when you were absent, you can pinpoint that pretty easily. These match up with the calendar. You can see the ones I'm still going to do until all through next week. And then there will be a new unit. And so the new videos will be at the bottom of that unit. But as they become available, I'm making them live here at the bottom of this list. I was talking about that earlier, so I just thought I would point that out. All right, let's go to the readings section. Again. So I'm here in my tavern because today we're going to start with the Canterbury Tales. And if you started reading by looking at the background information and the general prologue, what you found out is that that story starts at the Tabard Inn, which is a pub slash place to stay on the outskirts of London. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the background information. I'm going to open my notes. So if you have your PDF, you might want to open it. I don't know how you're doing your notes. Some people like to make notes right on the PDF, follow along with my notes and add them. I use the free version of Cami. I like it a lot. It saves all of my stuff, and I can reopen them from year to year and add things. So I find it helpful. You might like it too, I don't know. All right, let me go through the notes for the background information. First, they give you some notes on Geoffrey Chaucer, the author of the Canterbury Tales, and then they give you notes on the Canterbury Tales. So I want to go through and talk about some of the crucial elements of that reading assignment, and then we'll look a little bit at the general prologue, and then that's it for today. Oh no, I wanted to talk about, let you know if there's any questions on discussion number 1. Okay, so Geoffrey Chaucer is the author of many works, but the one that we're going to look at is the Canterbury Tales. I do think that it's worth writing down the years that these people lived. You need to know representative authors from time periods. So if somebody ever says, who are some prominent writers, or if a midterm asks you, what are some prominent writers from the medieval time period, then you would say Chaucer, because he is the most prominent writer of the medieval time period. Notice that they have his lifespan with the letter CA. That stands for circa. That means that they don't know for sure when he was born. They think around 1343. So we're talking about the 14th century. And this is the time of the plague. This is a time of, like the caste system that they have with the estates. And that's one of the first things that's mentioned here. They talk about how medieval society, and you probably studied this like in middle school or something, do a project with the serfs and the royals and, that whole hierarchy. So it's the same time period. So there are nobles, people who have wealth and titles, and land, and then there are people who don't, basically, who work for those people. There's the nobility, and then there's the commoners or the serfs. Very little movement between these social strata. There is another strata, and that is the church. But the people who went into the church as priests or nuns or monks usually did so from the noble class, because you'd have to be, literate. People from the common class or the serfs did not just jump into the clergy, because they wouldn't be considered educated enough to understand the Bible and stuff like that. All that stuff got explained to them by people who were in the aristocracy and went into, the church life. So there are really these three medieval estates, but the text talks about how at this time, we can look back now and we can say, but at this time, there are the glimmers of a middle class. They probably didn't see it at the time. Chaucer might have, because he was very observant, but he definitely did write about this middle class that's emerging. For example, if you have a commoner who ends up saving enough money, something happens and he gets enough money that he opens a storefront, or he decides to be a merchant, or he purchases a boat or something like that, or land. There is this group of people that are starting to do that, but they're not noble. They don't have a title that's given to them, through their family line. So they're not inheriting money, they're creating money. And so there's this sort of emerging middle class that we talk about. And we can see examples of it in Canterbury Tales, because Chaucer has some characters who are middle class characters. They wouldn't have had a term for middle class back then, but the idea is that there are people who are starting to move out of that serf stage, and they're not digging ditches, as much anymore, some people, but they can't be accepted into the nobility because they don't have a hereditary title to inherit. So there is a note about that in the text, and they talk about how Chaucer is influenced by that. And we look back on it now and we see it, but Chaucer probably only was beginning to see what that meant to his society. They talk about Chaucer's life. One of the key elements to remember, and it's really the reason why he's able to write the Canterbury Tales, is because he spent his life in the service of very wealthy, noble people. And Chaucer was, as a young man, in the employ of very wealthy, very highly connected people as a page. A page is just a messenger. And he ended up working for King Richard Edward III. So he is a commoner, but he's in the environment of the nobility frequently. And it's this quality of his life that makes it possible for him to observe people of all walks of life. If you were a commoner, otherwise, you would probably never even spend any time with anyone of the noble class. They wouldn't want to spend time with you, unfortunately. So, the idea is that they're beneath the upper classes and the bourgeoisie. So the concept that Chaucer can spend time observing the upper class, the nobles, the king, and traveling with them to other countries really expanded his experience way more than the average commoner would have had at the time. The average commoner would probably never travel more than 5 miles from their village in their whole lifetime. So that he got to travel to, they talk about Spain and France and Italy with King Edward, made it so that he could be more observant and know more about all types of people, not just commoners. So they talk about, these people are not going to show up on the midterm, the people that he was associated with. It's good to know those names, but it's not going to be on the test. I don't know if you want me to tell you stuff like, it's better if I tell you, right? Another thing that they mention in this background stuff is that Chaucer wrote in English, and we think of him as the father of English poetry because Chaucer wrote in English and hardly anybody else did. English was the language of the common people. It is springing up from the Anglo-Saxon. If you were writing something serious in literature in the medieval time, you wrote it in French because it was a more legitimate language. But Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales and his other works in English, and therefore he really helped to legitimize English as a language of literature and not just a language that commoners use in the streets. So he elevated English in that way. And so they talk about how instrumental he was at that point. Chaucer was knowledgeable. He could read multiple languages due to his job. And they talk about how he was on some missions to Italy during his time period. And it just happened right around the end of the 14th century when Chaucer was a young man that the Renaissance was going on in Italy. And so you have this flourishing of music and literature and art going on in Italy that was not happening in England. The Renaissance in England doesn't happen for 100 years after that because things travel so slowly during this time. And so he sees what's happening in Italy during this time and the literature that's being written, and he is energized by that, and it spurs him to try to write and create and develop his work. There's a note over here about the difference between the two Renaissance periods. There's a lot about things that inspired his ability to write the Canterbury Tales. But I think his strange social position is the main element. The fact that he was a commoner in the court was a little bit of an anomaly, and it allowed him to write about people of all walks of life. They talk about that. There's a good passage right there on page 216 for that. Are any questions on that part? All right, the second part of the background is about the piece that we're going to read, the Canterbury Tales. And one of the first things they talk about is the concept for it. And I want to expand this image of the frame tale because frame tale is a term that you need to know. Sometimes it's called a frame story. But a frame tale is a piece of literature where there's a main story and then sub-stories within that main story. And the Canterbury Tales goes like this, right? The idea is that there are these pilgrims. They are traveling from London to Canterbury to pray at the Canterbury Cathedral. And as the story starts, they're in the Tabard Inn. That's why I have my background today, so that you can be fooled into thinking that I'm in England in the 14th century. And so at the Tabard Inn is where they are all located, all these pilgrims, because they're going to be going on the road the next morning. And the Tabard Inn is sort of like the last stop on the edge of town before you go on this journey to Canterbury. And it's a real place. You can go there today and you can go to the cathedral. It's a real historic place. And so they're enjoying their evening and they realize they're all going the next day to the same location. And they start talking about how they ought to go together. There are 30 of them. And this is Chaucer's concept for the Canterbury Tales. So all these pilgrims ought to go together for safety and, you know, to enrich the experience. We all have been on long trips, and the more diversions you can have, the better. Well, we probably just use our phones nowadays with all of our apps and games and things, but they didn't have that. So they are going to go together, and that's the big story. Within that story, there are a bunch of sub-stories because they agree to have a contest. And the contest is this: everybody's going to tell 2 stories on the way to the cathedral and 2 stories on the way back from the cathedral. And whoever tells the best story will win a free dinner back at the Tabard Inn when they return. So then the Canterbury Tales is made up of all these different tales that the different pilgrims decide to tell. This is brilliant on Chaucer's part because he gets to create the pilgrims, and then through the pilgrims, he gets to create the tales. As a writer, that's pretty cool because you get to sit there and go, I made this miller super mean and cruel. What kind of story would he tell? And then you get to develop a story that's for that character. What kind of story would this dainty nun tell? And so you can then create all these little individual stories, and the pilgrims are telling them. I put arrows here because as these pilgrims tell their tale, in between the tales, the pilgrims are talking to each other. And they'll say stuff like, that was a really interesting story, or that story makes me think of this thing from my life. And, you know, so they're having conversations really in the tales and in between the tales. So there were supposed to be 30 pilgrims, and there was supposed to be 4 tales for each pilgrim, which is like 120 different tales, but Chaucer never finished it. This is an unfinished work. He only really wrote 24, and some of them are fragments. So it's maybe he should have only had 5 pilgrims. I don't know. that might have been a little bit easier to handle, but he never did finish it. I'm gonna put frame tale away over there. So they talk about St. Thomas of Becket, which is something that you should definitely make a note of. Thomas of Becket was the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was murdered in the Canterbury Cathedral and made a saint. And so all of these pilgrims are going to pray to God and to St. Thomas of Becket for their health because they've made it through the winter and they're grateful that their prayers have been answered because plague's going on and winters are cruel and they don't understand bacteria. So the fact that they made it through winter is something pretty awesome. And they're going to go see this shrine of St. Thomas of Becket. We already talked about how they represent a wide variety of types of people. It does say in this item right here, this is on page 217 of the PDF, it does say that it's not as realistic as the characters seem because Chaucer is very good at describing them and making them lifelike and individuals. That in reality, these different people would not be traveling together. That it wouldn't happen that a knight would travel to Canterbury with, you know, a dishonest monk. It just wouldn't happen. But Chaucer puts them together so that he can show us a cross section of society. And so we learn a lot about society through this piece. The text talks about how there are a variety of storytellers, and so Chaucer can include a variety of genres. Courtly romance, fabliaux. A fabliaux is a dirty story. I'll just tell you that Canterbury Tales has a couple of dirty stories in it. We're not going to read them. I wouldn't mind it. And if I was teaching the class my own schedule, we would definitely read them because they're funny, but they're kind of low humor and, you know, like bed hopping type stuff. So-and-so ended up in bed with so-and-so's wife because he got confused in the middle of the night and, you know, stuff like that. So they talk about that here, the different genres, because there are so many different storytellers, there's all kinds of different types of stories that Chaucer envisioned. And I like this line a lot. It says, Chaucer conducts two fictions simultaneously, the individual tale and the pilgrim who has been assigned to it. So he's creating the storyteller and the story. We already talked about how it's unfinished. Oh, at the bottom of this page, they start to give you some of the different types of characters. They're all named basically on their job. So there's a knight, there's a miller, there's a reeve, there's a nun's priest, a pardoner, a physician, a cook. I highlighted all of them here. A summoner, there's some more on the next page. All different walks of life, a monk, a parson, a franklin, a friar. So I highlighted those just because they kind of start talking about the different characters that are in the frame tale. Verisimilitude, I put that in purple because it's a term that you need to know. Verisimilitude has to do with the quality of being lifelike, like how true to life are these characters? Maybe you've seen a movie where you say to yourself, well, I can't really see somebody doing that. I'm like, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying this storyline because I don't think people do that. That's not in human nature. And so then that would be very little verisimilitude. But then maybe you've read something or watched a movie where it seemed like what happened to the people could really happen. And that would be a high level of verisimilitude. So there's a verisimilitude range. And what they always point out about the Canterbury Tales is that it has a high degree of verisimilitude. We can definitely picture these people. We can picture their behaviors. We probably know people like some of these pilgrims. And so Chaucer's able to capture that lifelike quality in their personas. Are there any questions on the background for the tales? Anything that I didn't touch on that you're wondering about from your reading? Okay, so I asked you to read a couple pages of the general prologue. The general prologue is about 20 pages long because it's an introduction to all of the characters, all the pilgrims, I should say. But I just think you need to get a taste for what the general prologue is like. So if you read it in the PDF, this is in the Middle English. And the beginning part, before it gets into the characters, just talks about why they are going on their pilgrimage. And it sets the scene a little bit. Maybe you read this version, or maybe you read the interlinear text. This is easier because it's got a translation right in there. If you just read all of the non-bold, then you'd be reading the translated version. Maybe that's easier. It's long no matter which one you pick, but this one starts with the idea. It's written in Middle English, but I'll go. You want me to read it in Middle English for you? I can read it. I had to memorize it for my Chaucer class. Nobody's saying anything. So what he's basically saying is that when April comes with its sweet showers, in order to pierce the drought of March, it's like when spring comes, and bow that every vine in which liqueur of which virtue engendered is the flower, and when all of the juices start flowing back into the flowers, and the wind starts blowing its breath over everything, then people start thinking about going on pilgrimages. The crops are growing, so people, when the weather gets nicer, start thinking about going on a trip, and they think that they're going to go and thank God for their health. It's the same thing with us. I mean, why do we have spring break? Same thing, except I don't know if you're going to the shrine to pray at spring break. And especially from every sheet is end of ENGL to Canterbury they wend, and the holy blissful martyr for to seca, that hem that holpen one that they were seca. So when they were sick, they prayed to the holy blissful martyr. They mean St. Thomas of Becket. And they would pray to him to thank him for their ability to get through and their survival through the winter. So that sets the scene for all these pilgrims to be at the Tabard Inn. And the narrator is Chaucer. So when we have that first person narrator, Chaucer puts himself in the story as a character. So he says, I was in Southwark and at this Tabard Inn, and I was getting ready to go on my pilgrimage when I noticed that there were all these other people and they were also going on the pilgrimage. So I started to talk to them and we decided we would go together. And then he says in this part right here on line 35, while I have the time and space, I'll tell you about all of them. I sat down the night before and met them all and spent time talking to them. So before my story moves on, I think I will just tell you about all these different pilgrims, what they looked like, how their clothing was, what their horses were all about. That was a big deal back then. But you can tell a lot about somebody from their appearance. So I'll tell you what their degree was, meaning their status in life, and their array, meaning their clothing. And that way you'll be prepared when you read the rest of the tales after the prologue for each character. So he launches into the character descriptions, and we call these portraits. They're portraits of the pilgrims, you know, in words. And so the first one is the knight. The knight is very honorable. He is older. He loved chivalry and courtesy, and he had ridden in war farther than anyone. He has fought all over the world. They list out some of the places in the general prologue where he's fought, everywhere from Prussia to the Middle East. He's been in 15 mortal battles where he killed people or else he was going to get killed. So there's a description of, it's sort of an implied description of his ability as a warrior. If he is living after he's been through that many battles, then he must be a good warrior, or else he would be dead. There's a reference here to locations that are in the Middle East. So the suggestion is that he was part of the Crusades, and he has made it through all of that. As a matter of fact, he, in terms of his array or his clothing, he's wearing the exact clothing that he wore on the battlefield. It's like he just came off of the battlefield. And his armor is rusted and stained, and he's going immediately to Canterbury. So the idea is that after killing, he's going to be absolved, and he's going right exactly straight to the church in order to be absolved of his sins. So he's a gentle, perfect knight. With the knight is a squire. A squire is like a knight in training, and he is accompanying his father and learning the tricks of the trade or how to be a knight. But he's way more interested in how he looks and getting the ladies and all of that. So he has developed skills that are more about entrapping women than fighting. He has had some limited war experience. These locations are all in France, unlike his father, who's been all over the known world. So he does have some war experience, and it talks about how that gets him a lot of credibility with the ladies. He wears clothing that's very fashionable and, top of the line. He always does his hair just right. He always has the right songs to sing. He's just the cool guy in the room. He hardly sleeps at night, probably because he's got a lineup of ladies who accompany him. And he talks about right here, he slept no more than does a nightingale. Well, nightingales are the birds that sing at night, so they're awake. The third character that comes out is the yeoman, and all three of these characters are together: the knight, the squire, and the yeoman. The yeoman is the servant to the squire and the knight. He is in charge of keeping the equipment of the knight and the squire in good order, making sure they have arrows, that they're clean and straight, that he's oiled the weapons, that they're ready to fight whenever they need to. And so he keeps all of that stuff very orderly, and that's his job. He's dressed pretty much all in green and like Robin Hood type character, and he serves those. It goes on and talks about a prioress, but I imagine you probably stopped right about those three. You could go on for another 15 pages because Chaucer goes on and describes every single one of, well, almost all of the 30 pilgrims. And so we call the general prologue is filled with their portraits. Then when the tales start, we can go back and look at the description and kind of figure out why does this character tell this tale and line up what their character descriptions are in the general prologue with the tale that they tell. So I just wanted you to get a little taste of the general prologue because it's a pretty famous work, the beginning part here. Are there any questions from that part before we wrap it up for today? Okay, so then if we look at the calendar, we can see that on Tuesday, we are going to go over the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale. It's about 28 pages in the PDF. If you don't want to read in the Middle English, it can be hard to read. And, I'm assuming that you're either using the interlinear text or, which I added here for both the prologue and the tale, but also I added a prose version. And I talked about this on Tuesday, but let me just remind you that I am providing you with a story version so that you don't need to read it in verse. So if it's easier, this is about 14 pages. So the other one's longer because it's in verse, and so it's skinnier. But there might be a few things you have to look up. For the most part, though, this is pretty easy to read. It's in paragraph and dialogue format. The Wife of Bath's prologue is longer than her actual tale because she's a very interesting character, as I pointed out at the beginning of class today. And she asks a very intriguing question through her tale. So, you know, she's the most colorful of all the characters in the Canterbury Tales. So you can read any one of these versions that you want to. The page numbers refer to the PDF, the interlinear text, or the prose version that I've presented to you. For Thursday next week, we have the Partner's Prologue and the Partner's Tale, which is a little bit shorter, but just looking ahead in case you need to think about your, you know, organization, make sure that you have prepared that. That'll be our last day to talk about the Canterbury Tales. So we'll go through the study guide for that one on Thursday and move on to the next time period the following week. Are there any questions about the reading assignments for Tuesday? Okay, I just want to end today with a reminder that the first discussion post is due tomorrow. You have until midnight to do those. They are here in the table of contents. Like you can get it here and then launch it this way. This is the topic. It's the same one that we talked about on Tuesday and Friday last week. Or you can just click on discussions over here, and that is where you post. So the forum is the discussion number 1. You'll click there and then create thread. This is where you will put your minimum 500-word response to this topic. And then the replies are due by Monday at midnight. So first you'll be posting tomorrow your response to the topic. It's about heroism. And then everybody will have until Monday night to do the replies. I did get a question, I don't remember what class it was from, but I did get a question in the email about how that gets graded. You can click right here and see, last Friday, I went through all of the expectations, what is being evaluated in your response. If you want a good response, which is like a high B or an A, this is what your response should be like. Fair is kind of like 75 to 85 or 70 to 85. Poor is not passing. And there are some examples from a different class, but the same concepts here. It's important to remember to respond to the entire question, all the parts. You can do that in separate sections if you need to. When you're responding to your classmates, you don't have to respond to everything they said. You can just respond to one thing that they said if you like. But remember that we're looking for meaningful contributions and proof of reading. If I'm reading your post or even your commentary and all it's really talking about is the same stuff that I've been presenting in lecture, that's not going to be a passing grade. All that proves is that you were listening in lecture. What you need to prove is that you read the material. So you should be quoting, you should be diving into what you've read and using examples of what you've read to support ideas that you have about the topic on heroism. Reminder that 500 words is the minimum, which means it will have the minimum grade. 150 words is the minimum for the replies. Again, that's a minimum. I highly encourage you to go back and review that website where I went over last Friday, or watch that video where I went through what all of the requirements are and what I'll be grading on, because that will be 1 grade. The post and the replies is 1 grade. So it's not a separate grade. That's why I made the due date Monday, but for that. That's why there's 2 different due dates, but all of this together, so 4 posts together equals discussion number 1. It's possible to do very well in your post and not very well in your replies and end up with a mid-range grade, in other words. All right, are there any questions? Anything I can answer about tomorrow's assignment that's due? I don't have any classes tomorrow, so if you end up having a question, you're not sure about something, just message me. You can message me on my Google Voice, which is here. Usually that's the fastest way. If you text me here, you could also email me and I will respond to you in case you have a question so that you can be successful as possible. If there are any more questions, then I'm ready to cut you guys loose for today and for the weekend, really. Next time I see you will be Tuesday. Any last minute questions? You can also just stay on and I'll answer a question if you have one. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and dismiss everybody. I will see you all on Tuesday where we get to talk about the wife of Bath. See you then.
Bye, Miss.
Bye, have a good day. Luis, did you have a question? Okay, I'm gonna end the meeting.